Welcome to the March 3rd, 2025 episode of the Energy Show. I'm energy journalist Markham Hislop, and today I'm going to be joined by one of my favorite energy transition experts, Kingsmill Bond. Kingsmill, welcome to the show, man.
Good to be back, Malcolm. Thank you.
We have been talking about the energy transition for 4 to 5 years now, you and I. I think I did my first interview with you maybe at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the things that I have noticed is that your vision, which is very close to ours, the way we see the energy transition unfolding, is far and away the more accurate reflection of the data, the evidence, the trends that we've seen unfold in the last 5 or 10 years. I know this is a loaded question or a leading question, let's say, but really isn't that the case? And the work you did at Rocky Mountain Institute reflects that.
Well, it's kind of you to say that. I mean, I think in fairness, all that we said is what quite a few other folks have been saying, which is that this is a technology shift. We know how technology shifts work. They work with very rapid growth of new technologies in broad terms. And the best way to understand the future, therefore, is to model the new, not the old. And that, I think, is what you've been doing, Markham, and what we've been seeking to do for a while.
One of the ways that we're explaining at Kingsmill these days is that the global economy, for some time now, but particularly it's intensifying, is undergoing a technology revolution. And there are all kinds of technology, AI and materials and so on and so forth. Energy is a subset of that revolution. And when you see it like that, that changes everything.
Yeah, I think it's very elegant to see the electrotech revolution as in many ways, is a continuation and a spin-off from the technology revolution. Laptops lead to solar panels, for example, and smartphones lead to batteries. So yes, it's very true to say that. And I think also we've increasingly now conceptualizing this in a single word, the electrotech revolution. That is to say, a series of technology shifts going on around the electron, the production of electrons through solar and wind, the use of electrons through electrification of transport and heat, and then the connection of electrons, which is where you have AI and digitization and battery storage coming in. So when you think about it in those terms and realize that there's three streams of technology change converging into a giant river of transition, which is proving increasingly unstoppable.
One of the things we're going to do in this interview is talk about Daniel Yergin's co-authored piece in Foreign Affairs called "The Troubled Energy Transition," and you wrote a counter to it. It hasn't been published yet, but you very kindly provided it, and I read it. And the point here is, I mean, Yergin is like a superstar in the energy transition field. He's very highly respected. He's a senior expert. He's founded IHS Market, which was bought up by S&P Global. I mean, he's a player. Presidents and prime ministers pay attention when Daniel Yergin speaks. But in this piece, he reflects exactly what you said, is that our mental framework is stuck in another era. And if you don't have the right analytical framework to understand the change, you get the erroneous conclusions that Yergin came to.
Well, yeah, I think he's clearly a very talented individual at reflecting the status quo of the last 30 or 40 years, like your own dear Václav Smil. These folks are incumbents, and they're reflecting the experience they built up in their own very long careers of the way the fossil fuel system works, and therefore that's what they're very able to articulate and reflect that. But of course, they're missing two things. They're missing what's going on outside the United States and the extremely exciting stuff, for example, that's happening in China, which I hardly need to remind your listeners was the driver of energy demand growth for the last 20 years. And now that is starting to come to an end with peak oil demand for transport in China now increasingly obvious. So they're missing what's going on outside North America. And then I think they're also missing what's happening outside the oil and gas industry. And again, it's very natural to do that if you've spent your entire career and analyzing the oil and gas sector, not to realize that the key number last year was the halving of battery storage prices, um, and not understand that the fact that battery storage last year, for example, deployment was the same in 1 year as it has been in the past 30 years. These are important things that are happening, and people aren't noticing that.
I want to make a point about perception, and I think this is germane to Jurgen, and that is oil in particular has never had a competitor in 125 years. It has been uh, coupled with the internal combustion engine, it has been the driver of so much of modern society. And it has a competitor now. It has a competitor in the form of electricity and batteries combined into electric transportation, not just cars and trucks. We're talking about buses. We're talking about delivery vans. We're talking about garbage trucks. The two and three wheelers. All of transportation is in the stage of being electrified.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, and as you know, and as you and we've also pointed out, the transport is actually particularly vulnerable because what are you doing? You're converting, as we said, you're converting a heat-based technology into work-based transport, and you inevitably are losing about three-quarters of your inherent energy. So now that batteries have been invented, they've got a massive, ripe, open target of an incredibly expensive and inefficient system, which has resisted, as you say, change for decades. And that's why I fear the oil system is particularly vulnerable at this moment of the combination of cheap batteries and cheap and falling in price electricity just makes it very hard.
That's a really good point. The oil industry is the most vulnerable to disruption. And we're already seeing it at the global level, the first signs of disruption in the global energy industry. We're seeing, for example, the super majors like Exxon and Chevron investing in oil fields that have a break even of about $30 a barrel for Brent because they know that low oil prices are coming and they're preparing for it already. They're the canary in the mine shaft. And then it will only be another 3 to 5 years, and we'll start seeing disruption in regional industries like Canada. Canada is the fourth largest oil producer in the world. And we're going to start seeing disruption here and disruption in business models. Now, why this is germane is that we're going to have a new prime minister on March 8th, and if the polls are accurate, it'll be Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of Canada, and in your homeland, the Bank of England and a climate energy finance specialist, got very high profile. His slogan is "Let's build," and he mentions clean energy. I mean, it's not like it's not there, but he's willing and I think is committed to investing public dollars in what he calls energy infrastructure, which means pipelines, both oil and gas, and LNG on both the west coast and the east coast of Canada. And you and I firmly believe that with peak oil demand likely coming in 2030, if not sooner, that is a disaster strategy. You're investing in the declining industry just as it's about to hit its peak and then begin to decline. And I think that's why this interview is so important, is there's another way, another vision for the future that isn't based on oil and gas, and it's coming at us at record speed.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, this is very much like building canals at the start of the railway era, when the only people who want you to do it are those who don't want to put their own money up. They want you to do it with public money, and that I think is an enormous weakness here. If you look at what the other canary, incidentally, in the coal mine is that the oil and gas companies are now spending most of their cash flow on giving the money back to shareholders through dividends and share buybacks and through paying down debt. So because they know, as you say, that actually the returns to be had in the future from this technology, which is now starting to have genuine competition, are going to be far lower than they have been in the past. So I think, again, people inside the industry, in their heart of hearts, get what's going on. So it would be a great shame to take public money and seek to prop up an industry which is facing catastrophic decline. And I think that the world that we are moving into, actually the IEA calls it the age of electricity. We're moving into a world where both solar and wind, which are now 90% of all new electricity capacity, but increasingly electricity itself is now going to be the primary driver of final energy demand. That's the future, folks. That's if you want to be building new energy infrastructure, put it into new industries which have a proper future and can build up jobs and opportunity. Don't try and prop up existing industries which have no future.
That's one of the points that Jurgen makes. He says that this energy transition has slowed down. It's not what we expected. And one of the reasons for that is that the growth in renewables, the growth in clean electricity has only been added to the existing primary energy demand. And this is one of the key arguments that the oil and gas advocates make. They say, look, if you look at the growth in primary energy demand at the global level from 1945 to today, it's a straight up. I mean, there's enormous growth in primary energy demand. The problem is, as you point out, that growth has been very inefficient. You're not using very much of the energy. As that changes, and you and I you worked with Nick Eyre from Oxford. I've interviewed Nick about his ideas. And as electricity becomes the primary fuel or the primary source of energy, the increased efficiency leads to lower primary energy demand. And Jurgen misses that, completely misses that. And I think most people miss it because the oil and gas industry makes exactly the same argument.
Yeah, I mean, it does sound a little bit counterintuitive, but just maybe to take on more broadly this argument of more and more and more that's made by Fressos, the academic, and picked up by Daniel Jurgen and others. So there are two responses to this, or three responses to this. First of all, actually, analytically, it's incorrect. So the argument is made that we use more and more energy, but there's a lot of survivorship bias going on here. So, for example, a primary source of energy supply in 1800 was fodder, used fodder for horses. Now, it depends whose database you take, but even the most aggressive database has peak global fodder demand is 1971. So we're 50 years beyond the peak, folks. That's not a more and more and more argument. In terms of fodder demand, we're also incidentally past peak wood demand. So, in and of itself, the argument is not actually accurate. But furthermore, there's a much more profound point, which is that we humans use energy that is cheap and available. And because solar and wind are everywhere and electrification enables them to be deployed in an increasing number of sectors, that stuff is just going to keep on growing. And what it's going to do, economics 101, is push out the stuff at the top end of the cost curve. Okay, you can have a boring debate about how that works, but that's got to go, folks. And that means there's a lot of risk inherent in the incumbent system.
You made a point to me years ago that has been borne out by subsequent events, and that is you said the new energy technologies will first of all take demand, they'll take growth in demand. And when they've expanded enough that they've taken all the growth, then they'll start eating into the existing demand. And that's exactly what's happening. Clean energy, like electricity, is now about like 75, 80% of all new energy capacity building every year. And we're not very far from 100%.
Yeah, and I mean, again, it is absolutely simple maths. Anyone could do it themselves with a spreadsheet, right? If you grow something you've got two lines, one is growing at 20% and the other is growing at about 1%. Others growing, I should say, about 3%, 3 or 4%. That's electricity, and solar wind growing at 20%. Eventually, one of those two lines, one growing at 20%, will obviously take all of the incremental supply of electricity, and that basically is the point we've got to. We have some cyclicality, but there's an obvious structural peak. So if structural demand growth is something like eight or 900 terawatt hours a year. That's basically what we did last year in solar and wind alone. And then, of course, you're adding, some nuclear and hydro on top of that. So yeah, we've reached a structural peak in so far as fossil fuels is concerned, going into the electricity sector. But actually, the next interesting point is when you don't actually even have to start to cut into the fat, because the next thing that you do once you've taken the growth is you take the depreciation. So if the fossil system is depreciating naturally at 2% points per annum, because these things run out, then that's a further increase of around 600 terawatt hours that these guys could take before they start to cut into the fat. That's going to be the story in the next 5 years, and then by 2031, we're actually going to start to cut into the fat and close down some of the existing assets as this stuff gets cheap enough. So, yeah, I mean, it is an incredible story of continuous exponential growth, constantly surprising the experts.
And there's one variable here we haven't talked about yet, and that's China. Because China 20 years ago began investing heavily in clean energy technologies, including new energy vehicles, battery electric and to some extent hybrids. And they have become, I saw a figure the other day in a Bloomberg story. China now manufactures 45% of all goods consumed on this planet. That's an enormous domination by one country. And there was a third plenum that took place last year. And that's their every 5 years, the ruling class in China gets together and they decide what their economic strategy is going to be. China sees manufacturing and advanced industry as the path to geopolitical power. That's how it's going to achieve its greater China ambitions. And the next three things, as they call them, are going to be solar, batteries, and electric vehicles. That is how they're going to achieve their geopolitical ambitions, is to dominate the manufacturing in those industries. So when Biden put up the 100% tariffs, followed by Trudeau last year against Chinese EVs, and Europe put on lesser tariffs, but still tariffs, all they did was funnel China into the global south. And if you look at OPEC's modeling for oil demand, it depends almost exclusively on growth in the global south for combustion engine vehicles and the growth of demand of oil. So if China is now exporting that technology and building local manufacturing, I mean, look at BYD, what it's doing with local factories in Brazil and Hungary and Thailand and Vietnam and on and on. China is going to drive this energy transition more and more, and it's going to take away the market, the very market that the industry thinks will sustain it into the latter part of this century. It's a strategic mistake from their point of view, but it supports your argument that outside of North America, people just aren't paying attention to what's going on outside of North America.
Yeah, I mean, you only have to look at what's happening, for example, with two-wheelers in Southeast Asia, or with the famous example of deployment of solar in Pakistan, or Chinese solar panels ending up in Africa and the Caribbean. I mean, this is inevitably what will happen, is that if China's competitors pull away from competing from them in the industries and the technologies of the future, then you're leaving the field open to total Chinese dominance, which I think is something, is an area of profound concern, I know, to our leaders, and it should be. And the answer to it is not to give up and go backwards and double down on spear production. You actually need to be competing in the industries of the future, because if not, we will be the strategic competition will be between moribund old technologies versus superior new ones. I mean, as it were, in the same way as cavalry didn't have a chance against tanks in the Second World War, diesel-powered tanks won't have a chance against electric drones in the conflicts of the future. So, there's a very strong reason why our military is very concerned about this risk, and we need to pivot to successful industries of the future. And therefore, again, we have limited cash. right? We don't need to spend it on propping up stuff in the future.
This is a key point in Canada because if you look at the modeling, and I make this point all the time, but I can't make it enough. The leaders in Canada, whether it's the industry leaders, the business community, and much of the political class in Canada, have been seduced by this modeling that's done by OPEC, where it shows that we're going to have global oil demand will rise from 103 million barrels a day, which is roughly where it is now, to 120 million barrels a day by 2050. This is why Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says that Alberta should double its oil production from 4 million barrels a day to 8 million barrels a day, because they see the golden age of oil coming. We're, they think it's going to be better. There'll be more demand for Canadian oil and gas resources. But the analysis that you and I do shows exactly the opposite, that there's going to be a peak in 2030. We can debate about the length of the plateau, right? It could be a couple of years, 5 years, we don't know. But there will be very shortly a decline. And what declines along with demand? Prices. And so all of the infrastructure that we've discussed today, and that likely a future Prime Minister Carney would be subsidizing, is assets and infrastructure that will be obsolete by the time it's put into service.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, to state the obvious, it is basic risk management not to take
Yes.
forecasts of the incumbent for the future. I mean, there's no point building your strategy for the mobile phone sector on Nokia's manufacturing plans in the year 1999, because they might be a tiny bit biased in their forecasting. You might want to think about looking at some other folks. So no, I think Markham, as ever, you're understanding the situation in Canada, the risks facing these folks is incredibly important.
Well, it's here's the thing. It's astonishing to me that in my conversations that I have with, experts, political leaders, and so on, business community leaders, is that the worldview and the analytical framework that you and I have is completely foreign here. I can count on the fingers of one hand, and I would have fingers left over, of the experts or the academics or the analysts who understand the theory and the data that you and I use regularly. And it's astonishing to me that in the 21st century, a country as sophisticated as Canada, with the resources that Canada has, that it is dominated by a 20th century worldview around energy. And it's not that there's not even a conversation about the analytical framework that you and I are talking about. They don't know it exists.
Mhm.
I won't go into the details. I mean, I've had this discussion and you can see it in my columns and some of our shows. That is astonishing that a country like Canada can be so out of touch with the dominant trends that are going on in the world.
Um, yeah, I mean, again, it's also, of course, possible that you and I are wrong, Markham, and we too are failing to
Sure.
listen to. So I think it's important to listen to all sides, but I think just looking at the very simple data that just keeps on coming out month after month about the falling costs of these technologies, the rising growth of electrotech solutions, and therefore the shrinking capacity for fossil fuels to maintain the status quo. I mean, we it does need to be debated, but yeah, it seems strange that people aren't seeing what's going on outside their bubble.
This is another thing that you and I have talked about is the role of incumbents in energy conversations and energy policy. And this is Canada's problem, is because we're not a large economy. We're only 40 million people. And we do have, relative to our population, a large economic input, like on a per capita basis. But, we're not in the same league as the United States or the EU or China or what have you. We play in the middle. And so that has a lot to do with how we think about things. But it's also true that if we don't change, if we don't invest now in the energy industries of the future and the related industries. I'm a big fan of turning oil sands bitumen into materials instead of burning it. And next year there will be a process available, if it's not available this year, developed by the Alberta Innovates, that will turn bitumen into the precursor for carbon fiber. Cheap, high quality, automotive grade carbon fiber. And the value derived from a barrel of bitumen then goes up 400%. So
Well,
it's not even an incumbency issue. It's a why are we burning it when we could make four times the money making it into something?
yeah,
That's why these kind of conversations are important, is because we're leaving money on the table.
yeah. No, I mean, I think you're right. I think you've got to, in this dangerous world of increasing splits between nations, you have to play clever, have to play smart, and that just means listening to all of the parties and making your mind up on where and as you Canadians say, where the puck is moving, and and if the puck's so obviously moving to an electrotech future, then that's what you got to play for, and that's operating smart.
Well, Kingsmill, this has been a fascinating conversation as always, and I'm looking forward to getting you back now. The Energy Show has been around 6 weeks, but we'll have you back in the near future because I think this conversation around where the global energy system, and really the global economy, and actually, I will give Jurgen credit for this idea. And he says it's not just the energy system that's being transformed. We're really rewiring the global economy. I think that's his phrase, rewiring the global economy. And
Might have been Saul Griffiths before him, but yeah,
wherever he got the idea, I mean, that's in his piece. And I think that countries like Canada need to be in on the rewiring. This is not only a risk to what we have, it's a tremendous opportunity that we're not taking full advantage of. And so we're going to have you back to talk about that more.
okay, fantastic. Thanks a lot, Markham.
Thanks for watching the show. We are on a mission to reach 10,000 subscribers and over 1 million views. If you're enjoying the content, give us a thumbs up, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to our channel. Thanks for being part of our community.